Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we're doing a ship in a bottle. Well, I know that we've done this before, but the other one was more of a step-by-step how-to instruction. This is just kind of having some fun here on Tuesdays and trying something a little different. And what I have in mind for this one is not one ship, but two ships in a bottle. And for that, I have this larger bottle. But it all starts off over at the bench with a little bit of a sketch as to what I want to accomplish. Well, this is a sketch of one of the ships, and only one. This is where it all starts off, and you can sketch out the size of your boat, the size that you want it, and then hold it up at the back behind your bottle to see if it's going to fit inside as far as its height and its length goes. So from here, after you get your sketch, what I've done is I have made up little 1/8 inch thick templates out of just hardboard. I've drawn out what I think would be a pattern, and I've cut them to make the templates. Then we're going to cut a blank. Now in the last one I used basswood. In this one here I just have some scrap pine, and that's all I'm going to use for the hulls of these ships. You can use whatever type of wood you want as long as it's fairly carvable. It's a softer wood, makes it easier to work with, but if you don't have a softer wood, of course you can do it in maple or whatever you like. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to transfer the design or the pattern or whatever you want to name this of our hull onto our pieces of board. Now this one is 9/16 of an inch wide, and it is 1/2 inch thick. How long it is? Well, I don't know. Let's see here. It's about 7 inches long. But either way, what we're going to do is I'm just going to mark out this hull. This is the top view, and we'll just mark it out onto our piece of pine. Just like that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a small square, and I'm going to transfer those lines from this top profile to the side profile. And once we get that done, we can take our side profile template, line it up here at the bottom. These are flat bottom boats because they will be sitting on top of resin. And just like we did before, we'll trace out our side profile. Just like that. Now there's many ways that we can cut this out, but for me, I'm going to take this over to the scroll saw and get it cut to its final shape, and then I'll come back and see you. And there we have our two hulls roughly cut with our top and our side profiles. What we need to do now is do the final shaping here at the bow and the stern. No boat is squared edge like that. So I'm just going to use a little carving blade here, and we're going to carve this down to get it to its final shape. You just want to take your time. You can use, if you don't have carving knives, or if you're not comfortable with carving knives, not everybody is. If you are not comfortable with this and you would rather do something a little less maybe aggressive or a little safer in your mind, then you could always use your Dremel tool with a drum sander attachment on it. That works perfectly, and it gives great results too. I've done it myself. And but this time I wanted to use my knife, so that's what I'm going to do. So you want to gradually carve it down. You're not trying to get the profile at the bottom along the keel. You're not trying to get that to be pointed because this will remain flat so that it can sit on top of the resin once we pour it for the water. What you're trying to do is get the bow here to be that pointed profile. So try not to take off too much material and kind of visualize it as you go. For those of you who are wondering what I've got on my thumb there, that is a flexible protection tape, basically. So if the knife should slip and dig into my thumb, that tape, it's a flexible, almost like a rubberized material, but that is going to protect my thumb. Not 100%, so you still have to be careful, but at least it will be better than just digging into my bare thumb. Okay, so I'm going to continue carving this now. That's one side at the bow almost done. Once we get pretty much the shape that we want there, all the way around, we're going to carve the back of it too to have that rounded kind of profile. Once we get all of that done, we can give the hull a very light sanding and take out any of the knife marks. I'm going to do that for both of these hulls, and then we'll move on to our next step. All right, so we have both hulls shaped at the bow and the stern the way that we want it. We can always adjust it a little bit later if we need to. What we need to do now is we need to cut out the deck. And that's that square, or rectangle rather, that we drew out on the top surface there. So all we're going to do for that is we're going to carefully use our knife here. We're going to cut along those lines, and then using a chisel, we're just going to shave down to get the deck below the edge of the gunnels there on the side of the ship. You just want to be careful here that you don't punch through the sides of your vessel. So just take it slow, one step at a time, and we can get this deck cut down. Now we're going to want to cut it down, I'm going to say close to, anyway, close to about 1/8 of an inch. Now this is where we see a lot of injuries in the shop because people are still doing this, holding their piece and pushing their chisel this way. Then the chisel slips and it goes into the side of their finger. That usually, if you've sharpened your chisels half decently, that usually ends up with a trip to the ER for some stitches. So let's not do that today. Instead, let's clamp our hull into the bench here, just carefully because it is a small piece, and we can work on it like that, keeping our fingers away from the path of our chisel. Okay, well I have our hull sandwiched in between two pieces of plywood, and I have that done just as a little extra bit of cushion. That way the metal of our clamps is not digging into our stock. As well, you may notice I'm not using my quick release. I'm doing that because I want a little more control over how much clamping pressure I have. So I would much prefer in this case to use the manual one, we'll call it, and have more control over how much pressure I'm applying to this hull. Okay, so I'm going to get this done so that I can concentrate on it instead of talking, and I'll see you guys when I get the hull, or sorry, the deck cut out on both of these hulls. And once you get the deck of your ship carved out, you can take a little bit of 220 grit sandpaper on a small block of wood, and you can just get in here and sand it so that everything is smooth. Now I know I said I was going to go about 1/8 of an inch deep, but after looking at it, 1/8 of an inch deep was really, it really wasn't proportionate to the size of the build. So I went about 1/16 of an inch deep. So we'll get this deck all cleaned up here and sand it, and then Well, then we can carry on. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do here for these is we're going to mark where the masts are going to go. So for that, all we need to do is line them up on our original sketch and basically just put a little mark there where it goes and center it from left to right on your hull. We're going to place a mark there, and then we're going to actually cut our masts or our mast pieces. Well, I got a little ahead of myself for cutting our masts because I want to stain them first. So just to give you the information, what I'm using for the masts will be 3/32 diameter wooden dowels, and they will be cut to various lengths. We'll get into that after, but it's much easier to color them now. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take a stain. This one here is called Colonial American, and we will just stain each one of our masts. Now, you don't have to go crazy here. Just put a little bit of stain on them just to give them some color. Just like that. And then we'll drop them in here to dry. I've drilled some 1/8 holes just for them to sit in while they're drying. All right, so I'm going to do all of these. If you do extras, you do extras. It's no big deal. Get all your masts stained, and then don't put your stain away because there's one more thing that we need to stain while we've got it. Okay, so we can put those aside, and while we have the stain out, we can stain the top surface of our deck on our hulls. Now we got a little bit over the edge, but that's okay because the hulls get painted eventually, so we're okay with that. Okay, so there's one, and now we'll just do the smaller of our ships. Okay, there we go. So we can put those aside and we'll let those dry up as well. Well, like I said, I got a little ahead of myself there. I ended up giving the masts 2 coats of stain, so we're still waiting on those to dry. So in the meantime, we're going to start the painting of our hull. And in this case, it's going to be white. Now what I've done here is I've kind of made this little T-frame like I did in the first tutorial. And this time what I've done is I have hot glued the hull onto this little T-frame. It just makes it easier to hold on to while you're working on it. So I'm going to paint this hull. It's probably going to take 2 coats. And once we get the hull painted, we can carry on. Well, our pieces of dowel are dry enough that we can work with them. The boats are still tacky, so we're going to have to leave those hulls. But we can start cutting some pieces for our masts. So I've made some marks here on a piece of scrap plywood for where I need to cut these pieces of dowel. And we're just going to, there's one there. We're just going to cut a few of these and just get them prepared for lashing them together. Well, the very first thing that we want to do is these masts are going to overlap like this by 3/16 of an inch. And we will glue them together like that and let them set up. We want to have them glued together before we start messing around with lashing. Okay, and with those glued together, we can now do the binding on them. We're just using black thread. This is a heavier count black thread, just like we did on our first ship in a bottle. And what we're going to use is just regular white glue for this. Now we're going to get a little bit of a pool of it here. Just like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to dredge this thread Going to leave the ends of it without glue, but we're going to dredge this through the white glue. We want to get it fully coated on there. Okay, just like that. All right, and once you're happy with the way that's coated, we're going to take our mast and place our thread on there so that it's where the pieces overlap, with the sticky side touching your mast. Now, I'm not going to say that this is a neat process because it's not, and we're going to wrap this now with the glue on it. And we're going to wrap it fairly tightly, and that glue is going to stick it all the way around. Well, we need a little more glue. And we'll just wrap it. Just like that. And now we'll just give this a little rub to get the excess glue off there, and we can put this off to the side to dry. And I will do all the rest of them just that same way. Well, I've given each of the hulls a wet sanding with 600 grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to apply the second coat of paint on the hull. Unfortunately, though, this will make it so that I can't use the hull until it dries. But by doing these thinner multiple coats, you'll get a much better result. Well, considering that we're kind of in a holding pattern with our hulls, we can turn our attention back to our masts. And the glue is dried up from our binding there yesterday. So I'm just going to take a knife and cut off all the excess thread. All right, so there's one. And we'll cut off the tails of the threads on all the other masts as well. Well, with those threads cut, we can now start some of the drilling of the masts. And let me just draw this out for you quickly. This is a very exaggerated view. This is the bottom of our mast, our 3/32 diameter dowel. And what we need to do at approximately 3/16 of an inch up from the bottom of each of our masts, we need to drill a hole right through the mast. Now that hole is going to be just big enough to house a 22 gauge wire. So what we're going to end up with is a mast with a hole through it, and we are going to put a piece of wire through and bend it something like this. And that will end up being the hinge where these where the masts fold down in order to get it into the bottle. So I'm going to get those drilled, and you know what? Let me show you what we're going to use to drill those. So for drilling the holes in the masts, I have a pin vise, and this is basically just a handheld drill for small, delicate work. And I have installed here a 1/32 inch diameter bit, which is just a touch bigger than what a 22 gauge wire is. So what I'm going to do is, you have to make sure that your masts are in the right configuration, and we're going to drill down straight down through the base of the mast. In this case, you want to make sure that you're drilling from left to right. Don't go front to back on the boat. So let me get one of these drilled, and I'll show you what we need to do with the wire. You will find this easier to drill if you use a sharp awl and just place a little indentation where you want your hole to be. That will help guide your bit. No different than if you were center punching and drilling at the drill press. So for here, we'll just take this bit, try to hold it square, and gently turn it down through your mast. It shouldn't take much. You just want to go slow though and make sure that you're not veering off square. And there we go, we just pop through. And it looks nicely centered. And it looks pretty square to our mast. So we're going to get that drill bit pulled out of there. And now we're going to take some 22 gauge wire and we're just going to cut off a piece, probably maybe, I don't know, it's maybe 1.5 inches. You don't need much. So we'll cut that off. And let me just pull the camera in here a little closer so you can see what we're doing. Okay, so I'm filming through the magnifier, so hopefully you can see this okay. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the wire and feed it through that hole that we just drilled. Now by cutting this wire with pliers, it actually flares the wire just enough that it doesn't fit through the hole. So you're going to have to sand off and make it round again. So get it about in the middle there of your wire, and then we're just going to gently fold this down. Now this is your hinge. Now I'm going to use some needle nose pliers and get that in a little tighter, but this is what you're after. This is your hinge that will allow your mast to fold down. So do that on all 3, 4, however many masts you're doing. Get all your masts prepared like that, and we can move on to the next step. And unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for this week's show. But that's okay. We've made some great progress and we're not in any hurry. Guys, these are very time-consuming projects, so don't think you're going to whip one of these off in an afternoon. It doesn't work that way. And one episode of the show for 20 or 25 minutes, whatever it ends up to be, that's a couple days work to put that show together and to get the model or the ships in a bottle to the progress that they are at this point. So don't be in a rush. Just take your time and have fun with it. That's what it's all about. If you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Click the bell and then you won't miss the notifications of future episodes of the show. Guys, it has been a load of fun bringing this to you again. A little different. We're going to get into some more crazy stuff next week and have more fun with this. I hope that you've enjoyed it so far. I hope that you're going to try it for yourself. But more importantly, I hope that you're going to join me again next week when I bring you part 2 and another Alternative Tuesdays.